Bienvenue. Je m'appelle Napoleon Bonaparte et je vais conquérir l'Europe. C'est mon empire. C'est moi. C'est ma femme. C'est mon fils bâtard. Nous détestons mon fils bâtard. C'est ma voiture. Un jour, je conquérirai l'Europe, mais pour l'instant, je vais m'asseoir et regarder mon jeu de société. Magnifique.
I, Napoleon is the new solo-only board game by G&T Games where you take on the role of the titular Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, living through his turmoils and victories. Each round you'll draw cards that will put future events into motion, and then you turn your attention towards his military campaigns across Europe and the Mediterranean. The goal of this game is to make you feel like Napoleon Bonaparte, and I think it mostly does that. But that leads us to a discussion of what's more important, the magic circle or having fun. We'll get back to that later, but first let's take a look at this game. Every round in this game consists of drawing cards and following their text, sometimes being forced to put them into effect immediately, other times being given the option of enacting them now or later. Your goal is to gain as much glory as possible and hopefully put an heir on the throne to follow in your footsteps. Before you get to the throne though, you have to work your way there. In the first age of I, Napoleon, the Commander Age, Napoleon's role as a cog in the machine, beholden to higher bureaucratic powers, is on full display. Your choices in this age only affect the game to put into motion events way down the line. Sure, there are battles to fight and glory to be had, but the choices of which battles to take on are not yours. You'll randomly stumble upon them as you draw through the deck with no way of anticipating when they'll sneak up on you. Once you've taken over as first consul, you get a lot more agency, but you also have to start paying attention to the domestic and foreign politics of France. You can only ever lose glory, but you can kind of mitigate it by spending some of your attention and luck away from battles and more on keeping the general populace happy. If you reach the first consul age, which I do say if because you can die in the commander age, if you reach the first consul age, you get to choose what campaigns you fight. You no longer have to rely on the deck to give them to you. Wage wars successfully and you get glorious glory. Lose wars and you are more likely to become a minor footnote in history. And now's probably a good time to go into how the combat system in this game works and why I think it's great and why I think it makes the game not for me. When you enter combat, you take note of any campaign modifiers that entered play through randomly drawing them from the deck and add those to the dice roll modifier, referred to as DRM in the game. You then can assign commanders to this combat, paying their price now, usually in administrative points, but occasionally in political sway or your own glory. These commanders interplay randomly from the deck, and you're going to want a lot of them, probably. After spending your points to assign commanders to this combat, you then can activate them once through all rounds of combat. Hopefully combat only lasts one round with a bloodless victory, but more likely you'll end up with a bloody victory, which really upsets the people of France. Or you get a stalemate, which means you need to do another round of combat right now to determine the actual winner of this conflict. And getting a stalemate also upsets the people of France, which makes you more likely to fail your domestic policy roll later in this round. If there's a second round of combat, you don't get to use those commanders you got boost from again, so you can either have from the start assigned more commanders than you could possibly need in the first round, paying their cost just in case, or use strategy and tactics cards that are also a one-time use per combat. The almost push your luck mechanic of only trying to spend what you have to works great, and is one of the few ways I feel the player has of affecting the game. So if I think the combat system is great, Why do I say that it makes this game not for me? It has everything to do with these modifiers. You can only ever get to +4 on your modifier, and it just always makes sense to do that because the margins for victory are so small. You have to get a 7 or higher just to get a victory, and a 9 or higher to get that bloodless victory that will keep the people of France a little less upset. And the consequences for failing to get a victory are almost always so astronomically high, in my opinion. Losing glory is always a price that I'm not really willing to pay in this game. But because the consequences are so high, it always makes sense to spend whatever cost it takes to make sure you get that +4 dice roll modifier. And it kind of goes hand in hand with my other big issue with this game, which is the player choices kind of make themselves. For example, the card drawing mechanic in this game also feels like it takes a lot of the choices out of the player's hand. Each round, you'll draw between 5 to 12 cards with the variability based off of a die roll after your first card draw. On average, I got about 8 cards per round, I'd say. This mechanic has a cool back and forth as early in the game, I felt like I wanted more cards drawn to get things into position for later, but at the end, I was hoping the rounds would end before more damage was done. Each card has instructions on what to do with it. Some have mandatory must place in X spot, while others give you an option of whether or not you want to place it now, or let it filter back into the deck to hopefully save you from a worse card down the road. Because you can't see what cards are about to be drawn, or sometimes even what cards are in the deck, it is really tough to make any sort of plans in this game at the first console era. You are kind of hoping for the best, but you don't really have much say. Player agency is really low. That's kind of because it's supposed to be. You're playing as Napoleon, who is being the commander of an army. He's not actually on the battlefield in this iteration. He is in his war room, miles away from any conflicts, and just kind of waiting to hear back on reports of whether or not his team won or lost a battle. And that's kind of fitting for what he actually did most of the time. He wasn't on the battlefield himself with a sword, swathing down waves and waves of Russians and Prussians and Austrians. He was in his throne room doing domestic politic things and not really being on the battlefield like he really wanted to be. And in a similar way in this game, you can't control the randomness of what cards you are pulling. You just pull them and kind of hope for the best. Some years playing this game, you end up with nothing happening. You just draw 5 cards that all go to campaign modifiers because they must be placed there and you didn't get a say in that. But then you don't actually draw a campaign and you don't have a campaign that you can do. And so at the end of the year, all things just revert back to the way they were. And now you're 1 year older, and that's just kind of how rounds in this game go. You can't really choose what you're doing a lot of the time, at least in the first console age. The Emperor age is where my choices actually started to feel like they mattered. You can maneuver yourself in positions where different campaigns are forced to happen. You can break treaties to make sure you go to war with Austria, and with the end so close in sight, all of the sacrifices of glories you have to make begin feeling much more important. There's a game mode where you jump straight to the Emperor era, and I think that's pretty good. First of all, it cuts the playtime down. My first playthrough from start to finish took about 6 hours total. The game box estimates between 1 and 4 hours, though I think without an early death, you're more likely to end up closer to the latter. When I played the Emperor scenario, that wrapped up in about 90 minutes or so. It puts you at more of a disadvantage than you otherwise would be, as the game state is worse than if I played through the Commander and First console era on my own, but that was a trade I was willing to make to get to the more interesting parts of the game. The game can end in a handful of ways. A card might tell you the game ends, likely with Napoleon dying. Or abdication is another way where you voluntarily, with quotation marks around that, step down from the throne. Or you could get the Holy Grail, reaching the limits of glory and enacting peace across Europe with an heir on the throne. Afterwards, you check a little table in the rulebook, and it tells you, based on how your game ended and what the board state was, how good of a job you did. And then after you read that, you say, "Thank you, Mr. Rulebook. I also think I am the greatest leader since Augustus." And then you pack the board game away. It's not the most climactic ending to a 4-hour-long board game, but at the same time, I do kind of appreciate it in the sense that all of the marks that you can reach in that table are really hard-fought victories that you have to claw your way to. It is difficult to get some of those achievements just based on how the game naturally develops. And I appreciate that there was something to reward me even when I felt like I didn't do that great of a job. And likewise, you can die very early on in this game, and so just reaching any of those laurels is an accomplishment in and of itself. And now I'm going to return to a discussion that I brought up at the beginning, which is the magic circle versus having fun. Now, the magic circle is a concept that I've adapted from The Rules of Play, which is a textbook on board game design that I really love. In my version of it, the way that I apply it at least is, how much does a game make me feel like I am the person I'm playing as? Such as in Dune Imperium, I do feel like I am a conniving supernatural space politician most of the time when I play that game. There has been so much work done in this game to make you feel like Napoleon. You can tell how much passion went into creating this. There is a reference book that is just the historical context for every single card in this game, and there are a lot of cards in this game. And it just goes to show how much was thought about when they made this game. And I think it kind of gets in the way of the fun a little bit. There are a lot of cards in here that either the choice is obvious or the choice is made for you in a way that really takes away some of the agency, kind of like how Napoleon's, boot on the ground agency was taken away when he became first consul and emperor. And also, the domestic policy and foreign policy phases in this game are a headache, and I sympathize with Napoleon because I had to live through that as well. I got glimpses of how interesting this game could be, but there was just so much noise around it that I found it hard to filter through to the juicy decisions. I have other solo games, so when I compare this to the ones I already have, I just don't think it will end up on my shelf. That's not to say this game isn't for you. There's a lot of neat things in here. Living through different timelines of Napoleon's life is a really cool concept, and as a history nerd, that piqued my interest big time. I also loved how simple it was. All the cards tell you what they do. The only confusing part is the setup, which really isn't that bad because all the cards tell you where they go. It might not be for me, but I am positive there's an audience out there that is going to love this game. People who are maybe more into history than me, people who kind of want a 4-hour-long light role-playing game that they can kind of turn their brain off for, or people who are willing to look at a board and find the very small ways that they can optimize this and get as many points as they possibly can wring out of their army. This game is going to be right up their alley, and I think that if that sounds like you should check this out. For me, though, I'm probably just going to play a few rounds of Imperium, Legends, Classics, or Horizons in the same amount of time it would take me to play a round of I, Napoleon if I'm looking to get a semi-historical solo board game fix. That is my review. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Do you tend to lean more towards thematic engagement or having fun? Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for being an awesome community. I am Eric with the Cardboard Herald.